We're still going to continue talking about greatest common factors, but in this video, our polynomial is going to have four terms. As we have here, we have b squared, and then we have 5b, and then 7b, and 35. So it's already broken up into four terms for us. Now, if I look at these, the first three all have b's in common, but the last one does not. And there's no number that I can factor out of all of them. So I'm going to have to try a different technique if this one is going to be able to be factored. And if I have four terms, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split up the first half, so these first two terms, and my last half, and making sure that that plus sign stays in between those two sets of parentheses. So now, looking at the first two terms, I can see that these both have a b in common. So I can factor out the b, and then just as I did before, write what's left over. So that's going to be b plus 5. Now, in the second set of parentheses, they don't have a b in common, but they do have this 7 because I know that 35 is divisible by 7. So I'm going to have this plus sign out in front and factor out the 7 from each of those terms. And when I do that, the 7b divided by 7 is going to just leave b, and 35 divided by 7 is just going to be 5. Now, if you've done this correctly, what you have in parentheses should match up. So I have this b plus 5 and this b plus 5. So right now I have a term here and a term here that are being separated by this plus sign. So this one's being multiplied by b plus 5, and this one's being multiplied by b plus 5. So I'm going to factor out the b plus 5 from each of those. So that's going to come from here and here, and I only write it once. What goes in my other set of parentheses is this b that I factored out at the beginning, and this plus 7, so I get b plus 7 when I put those together, and then I can enter this into my box, and then when I check it, it is correct. Now, the one nice thing about this is it does not matter which set of parentheses you put first. So this would have also been correct if I had written b plus 7 and then b plus 5. So the order that you write those parentheses in does not matter, but you do have to have them separated by parentheses, no sign in between because we are multiplying them, and you have to have b plus 5 in one of them and b plus 7 in the other. And just like we talked about before, we are reversing a process that we would have done before. We would have started with this as my problem, and I could FOIL it out, so I'd get b squared, and then I'd get plus 7b, and then I'd get plus 5b, and plus 35. I would FOIL it out, and I would end up with this as being my answer. So we're doing the opposite. It's called factoring. And you can think of it like unfoiling or undistributing the problem. All right, we're going to do the same process with this next polynomial. If I look at it to see if there is a greatest common factor out of all of them, I do not see one because the first three have a's. The only ones that are divisible by 2 are the second and the fourth. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to separate it, group the first two. Now, where this is a minus sign, that minus sign has to go with that a in the second set of parentheses, and I need to squeeze a plus sign in between there. So let me rearrange it so it's a little bit easier to see. I have a squared minus 2a plus in between those parentheses, and then over here I have minus a plus 2. All right, so now I need to look for a greatest common factor in the first two, and then the greatest common factor in the last two. So these two terms have a squared and minus 2a. So the only thing that they have in common is a. When I factor that out, it leaves me a minus 2. And then I bring down my plus sign. So looking over here, the negative a and the positive 2, the only thing that those have in common is a 1. But if I only factor out a 1, this is going to stay negative a plus 2, and I really need it to be positive a minus 2. So in order to change both of these signs, instead of factoring out a 1, I'm going to factor out a negative 1. That's going to change this to be a minus 2. And the way that that works is I have negative a divided by negative 1 turns into a, and 2 divided by negative 1 turns into negative 2. So now my two sets of parentheses match up, and I can factor out the a minus 2, and then going in between those I have a minus 1 for my other set of parentheses. And again, the order that you write these in does not matter, as long as one set of parentheses says a minus 2 and the other one says a minus 1. And this entire thing is what you're going to enter in that box. This third and final example is a little bit more difficult because now our polynomial has 6 terms. And when you have one that has 6 terms, there are 2 different ways that we could split it up. We could split the problem into the first 3, and then there was that minus sign, which would have to go in here with the 8. So the first 3, the last 3, and I can see what we can factor out of here. Looks like the only thing these would have in common would be x to the 3rd. And then I would get 5x squared minus 40x plus 1. And then over here, the greatest common factor is going to be 2. And when I factor out that 2, I get negative 4x squared. And I can already see that these 2 sets of parentheses are not going to match up. So we're going to see if there's a different way that I can split this up. So rather than splitting it in half, if I group the first 2 and the middle 2 and the last 2, maybe those will give me something that's going to match up. So out of this first set of parentheses, I have a 5x to the 4th. And when I factor that out, it leaves me with x minus and negative 40, or 40x to the 4th. When you divide that by 5x to the 4th, that just leaves 8. So now I bring down my plus sign. And over here, the only thing in these middle 2 terms that would have in common is x squared. So when I take x squared out of x cubed, that just leaves 1x. And then I take the x squared out of the negative 8x squared, that just leaves negative 8. So far, so good. These 2 match up. So again, I bring down this plus sign, and I have 6x minus 48, and I know that 48 is divisible by 6. So I bring the 6 out. And since the 6 has been factored out, that just leaves x. And negative 48 divided by 6 is negative 8. So these 3 match up. So I'm going to write x minus 8 one time. And then my other set of parentheses is going to have 5x to the 4th plus x squared plus 6. And so that's what I'm going to enter into this box. And then, oops, I did not have squared there. Check my answer. And that's how you figure that one out. So hopefully these factoring videos will help. This is how you factor by grouping. This only works if your term has 4, or if your polynomial has 4 terms or 6 terms. But again, you can always look at the beginning to see if there's anything that they all have in common that you can factor out of all 4. So if you have any questions, ask me in class.